So the purpose of this workshop is to explain what yoga is about. These days everybody knows yoga. It's very popular. But actually there are not so many people who really understand what yoga is about, what it means, what the purpose is. Also, yoga is a very ancient science, but there clearly is a modern yoga and a traditional yoga. And traditional yoga barely exists anymore. The yoga that we see that is so very popular and commercial, I call that modern yoga. And most people do not really understand what yoga is. We have an idea, we have a feeling, but yet if you look at most of the yoga classes, it doesn't deliver what traditional yoga promises. And I'm going to explain why that is what is happening these days. I was trained in yoga starting more than 40 years ago. At that time, yoga was obscure. Yoga was not a commercial thing. And it was, modern yoga didn't exist. All the modern forms of yoga that we have these days, like hot yoga, vinyasa yoga, ashtanga yoga, power yoga, bikram yoga, hot yoga, all these flow yogas didn't exist. When I started yoga, yoga was rather obscure, meaning it was not really fit for everybody, which means it's not really commercial or commercially interesting. Yoga was something that people who were looking for alternative lifestyle felt attracted to. People who were also interested in organic food, people who love nature, New Age people. Then, in the late 1990s, yoga suddenly exploded because famous people, no, it's okay, because famous people started to come out telling the world that they are so much into yoga. Sting, you know Sting from the Police, Madonna, Christy Turlington, and many other people, famous people. Influencers didn't exist at that time yet, and now you have many. The world has changed enormously. But what happens if you want to commercialize something, if you want to popularize something, you have to make it easily accessible to the masses of the people. Not only people who like organic food or who love nature. So what did they do? They invented diet yoga. Why diet yoga? If you know a little bit about marketing, you learn that people's appearance is the strongest motivator to be interested in something new. And diet yoga was a very powerful way to promote yoga, to make yoga accessible to many people who otherwise would never have felt attracted. They would just do aerobics or belly dance or something else, CrossFit. But diet yoga promises that you can take care of your shape, of your health, of your weight. And so many people flocked to the yoga studios. Yoga was obscure because most people didn't really understand yoga. There was so much mystery and also misunderstanding, dogma surrounding yoga. When yoga was popularized, made accessible, sadly, they achieved that by throwing out all the valuable aspects of yoga. There's no meditation in yoga classes these days. And if there is meditation, the teacher is constantly talking. There is no control anymore. It's just another exercise. And don't get me wrong, exercise is good. Anybody benefits from exercise. I like exercise too. But when I do yoga, I do yoga. And when I exercise, I get on my bicycle, or I make a long walk, or I get some weights and I do some exercise. Yoga and exercise is two different things. But to make yoga accessible to the large masses of people and to make it commercially interesting, they had to open it up to everybody. So they just got rid of all the interesting, the most valuable aspects of yoga. So I'm going to explain today the difference between modern and traditional yoga and why modern yoga does not fulfill the promises that traditional yoga for thousands of years have promised. And if you understand all this, you will also understand that modern yoga and traditional yoga are actually totally opposites of each other. Modern yoga is external. External means that you are focused on outside things. Music. All yoga classes have music these days. That is a no-no in yoga because music is nice, but like with exercise, if you want to listen to music, you have to do that at another time. Why? Because it distracts. But modern yoga is external. So music and a teacher who's constantly talking. When you do asana, there's constant movement, and the teacher is talking about the muscles and the joints and the health benefits and all the improvements that you can get from your practice. In itself, there's nothing wrong with that, except for the fact that it goes against the principle of yoga. Because traditional yoga is not external, it's the opposite, it's internal. And the purpose of yoga is to help you connect internally so that you become conscious of your subconscious thought flow, so that you start becoming aware of your heart's content, your true characteristics, which most people are not aware of. Traditional yoga is meditative. It allows you on an internal journey inside yourself. And modern yoga is external. One of the reasons why traditional yoga is not interesting or attractive for many people is because they don't understand what internal means and the value of that. So they think yoga is boring. They think traditional yoga is boring. because you do it in silence. You don't play music, but also the teacher does not talk all the time. The teacher will only talk when, in case of a lecture, my classes have a lecture, but then we have an exercise part. And because it is a structured course, I will explain how it works. I have to talk a little bit. I will help you to align properly, but for the rest, I'm quiet, so that you can feel what you do. And that is the essence of yoga that you do not find in modern yoga. How old is yoga? People who read, the first time I read a book about yoga 40 years ago, the introduction said yoga is 5,000 years old. And I believed that until I started practicing Hapkido, Korean Hapkido, in Amsterdam. And I started to read a little bit. I went to a Korean restaurant. I got interested in Korean culture. So I went to the library. Internet didn't exist, so I went to the library, got some books about Korean culture, history. And I noticed that Korean book also said the Korean culture is 5,000 years old. And then I connected the dots and I thought, is there a coincidence? Why is Korean history and yoga both 5,000 years old? I'm a stubborn Dutch guy. I started to ask myself questions. Does that mean that 6,000 years ago there was no Korean culture, no Korean peninsula, and people living their lives there? Does it mean that 6,000 years ago yoga just totally didn't exist, just 5,000 years ago, so poof, it just occurred just like that? And I realized that the number 5,000 years, is because written history doesn't go back further than 5,000 years. It is 5,000 years that we started to record things in writing. And that's how far we can look back. So how old is yoga really? Nobody knows. But if you understand the essence of yoga, you understand how old yoga is. I say yoga is as old as mankind becoming conscious. And that requires some explanation. Why is it related to consciousness? Then you have to ask yourself, what is yoga? Because modern yoga, for most people, that's just an exercise that you do in the gym. What is yoga? Yoga is the oldest science of life. And every culture and every continent has their own sciences of life, Korea too, but it is yoga that is still very alive, while the others are very obscure. What does it mean, a science of life? Human beings lived like animals hundreds of thousands of years ago. They didn't have intellect yet. They didn't have consciousness yet. But unlike other animals, we evolved and developed intellect, and we developed consciousness. Now, what do you do when you develop consciousness? You start asking questions. You look at the sky and you see the sun and you ask yourself, what is this? And when the sun goes down, there is a white ball in the sky, and that white ball is changing shape all the time. And it is fixed in a certain cycle. You start to notice things that animals are not aware of. So you start asking questions. What is this? What is that? But most importantly, you end up asking yourself, who am I? Why am I here? What is the purpose of me being here? Why am I suffering? One of the biggest questions that also modern people have is, why am I suffering? Why do I experience pain, anxiety, doubt, worry? So how old is yoga? It's as old as mankind becoming conscious. We don't know exactly, but tens of thousands of years. Maybe hundreds of thousands of years, but very old. And it started very simple with questions about the environment and questions about the purpose of life, but it became very sophisticated, very deep, philosophically very deep. And when many yoga teacher training courses are very superficial. The focus is on physical anatomy. And you have to do an exam at the end of the course, and you have to know all the muscles and the joints and but traditional yoga doesn't have. If you pick up any traditional yoga book, you will see that there is no chapter on physical anatomy. There is philosophy, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Vedas, Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And most yoga teachers these days haven't read those books, and if they did, if it was part of their teacher training course, they memorized a couple of the verses, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, and they can recite the verses, memorize them, recite them, but they do not know the practical meaning. Because ancient books, holy books, not only yoga, but also any other old books were written in symbolical language. And the symbolical language you start to understand when you contemplate the meaning. And that's what happens when you practice yoga. Because you very naturally you develop a contemplative mind. And when you read something, you don't read the surface, you feel what is behind it. And it sounds complicated the way that I tell you, but it becomes a natural ability that every yoga practitioner develops. And then you start to see how wonderful the information is that is hidden in the symbolical language. So, yoga is very old. We don't know exactly, but much older than 5,000 years. Just like Korean culture is much older than 5,000 years. How many yogas are there? 5, 10, 20? If you ask me, I would say there's only one yoga. The whole of yoga is Raja Yoga, is the science of yoga, and it exists out of 8 limbs. If one of those limbs is not present, it's not complete. Now what you see in most yoga classes these days is that 7 out of 8 of the limbs are not practiced in class because the focus is on the physical exercise. And even that is not done correctly, which I will explain the correct way and incorrect way of doing asana a little bit further down the road. All the yoga that we know these days, it appears like as if there are many different kinds, is all part of the whole science of yoga. They just take it out and isolate it and ignore the rest. And if you look at the modern yogas, Bikram and Ashtanga and Vinyasa. They are a good exercise in itself. They help people to become healthier and stronger, but they don't lead to the development of a contemplative mind. They don't lead to a soul connection or a heart connection. But nevertheless, it's good as an exercise. But if you look at the more traditional kinds of yoga, like Kundalini, Bhakti Yoga, Hatha Yoga, there are various. They are actually not different kinds of yoga in itself, standing on their own. Instead of being a form of yoga, they're actually a development stage in your practice. Like Bhakti Yoga, for example, that is the yoga of serving. But you can't just do Bhakti Yoga. There are Bhakti Yoga classes, maybe in India and maybe some in Europe. And then the teacher will tell you, here you have a bucket and a mop, please clean the floor. And you say, yeah, but I came to do yoga. Then he will say, or she will say, yeah, but Bhakti means serving. So it's good for you if you clean my floor or my windows. That's not how it works. Any person who starts practicing yoga naturally wants to serve. Why? Because you become more conscious. When you become more conscious, you become aware of your own suffering, but also of the world around you. Your family members, your neighbors, your colleagues, and animals. So you want to help. This is a natural development stage that you want to help, that you become compassionate. That is because of the heart being stimulated by practice of yoga. Kundalini Yoga. Kundalini is energy rising up. That is very important because in the lower part of your body are lower emotions and desires. They are the cause of our suffering. Energy has a natural tendency. I will explain this in detail in the course if you're interested. But just in short, energy has a natural tendency to condense and manifest towards the bottom. So most people's point of gravity is in the lower part of their body, which is the location of lower emotions and desires. Sexuality, fear, doubt, and worries, but also ego and ambition are located there. The old yogis understood, and they found a way to let energy rise. Why would you let energy rise? Because there are 3 chakras in the bottom responsible for lower emotions and desires, but if you go above that, there is the heart. There is love, there is empathy, there is compassion and passion. If you go higher, there is the throat, there is expression, creativity. But more importantly, you go one higher and there is the intellect. We now live in a society where the intellect is developed through 20 years of compulsory education in school. Starts already with young children, and it ends with university students. That leads to a huge development of the intellect, but in the past that didn't exist. Ancient form of education to develop intellect was done through systems like yoga. Not only yoga, every culture, every continent, every people had their own way of doing that. Korea still has several traditional practices that are actually not only just exercise, but also to develop the mind. And if you go one step higher, you have the crown chakra. The crown, it's the crown of the Raja. Hence Raja Yoga. The crown chakra is the location of wisdom, insight, deep insight, but also inspiration. Genius. Genius is not something that you learn from a book. You know, I'm going a little bit too fast now, but in Korean you have shininaso. Shininaso. What does that mean literally? Shin is God. So God came, or God is manifesting. But when do you say that? You say that when people are enthusiastic. Right? Nobody thinks about these things these days. We just use it. It is the same with genius. Genius comes from Latin of spirit. How is that related to genius? That you have brilliant mind. That is because if the mind, the intellect, and the crown chakra combined work together, it leads to genius. So genius is a condition. It's not something that you can learn from a book. Just like shinage, shininaso, that is a condition that occurs when you feel good about something. You're happy, enthusiastic, and you express that. Now, inspiration, what is inspiration? Inspiration is when you are in a zone and you're very inspired in speaking, and what you are putting out is very deep and very interesting, and it touches people's heart. Inspiration is also from a Latin word. It means in spiritus, which is what people in the church will say, in spiritus sanctum, in the spirit. So inspiration occurs when you are functioning in the crown chakra. Now this is all a little bit complicated, but I'm sure in your life you experience these conditions now and then. What is the practical benefit of this? Is that when you practice yoga, energy rises up, Kundalini, it's called the Kundalini effect. I'm trying to explain Kundalini yoga. Energy rises up, so it fuels the higher chakras, so you start functioning in a different way. You become more intelligent. Literally, you do become more intelligent. But more importantly, you start developing contemplative power, which allows you to understand deeply matters that you didn't understand before. Very practical example of this is just when you have a problem. When you have a problem, you're suffering and you don't know what to do. And you ask other people, please help me, I have a problem, and they don't know what to do. But then, in a quiet moment, you're just sitting on a bench, maybe you eat an ice cream, or you just watch the sky, the clouds. In a quiet moment, suddenly, the light goes on. In a cartoon, the cartoon character who has a bright idea, there's a light bulb above their head. That is this. Everybody has these moments sometimes, right? Where I'm getting at here is that when you practice yoga regularly, you develop this ability to have deeper insight and solve problems. Not once in a while, but on a regular basis, because it becomes a new condition. You start functioning differently. That is what this awakening means, awakening of consciousness. An awakened person is a person who functions in the crown chakra and has the ability to deep insight to solve questions. Questions about yourself, about your past, about your present, and about your future. But you can apply that in science as well. That is where genius comes from. There are many people with a degree, but when you hear them talking, you sometimes scratch your head and say, well, they have a degree, but there is no common sense. Why? Because they only function in the intellect. But then you talk with somebody else and you think, wow, that sounds amazing. What an incredible insight, or so interesting. And that is because they not only have intellect, but also the crown chakra functioning. To give you an example of a person who functions only with intellect and a person who functions with the crown chakra, you have to look at politics. It's a little bit tricky to talk about politics because people have different opinions. But if you look at the United States, you can see very clearly there is a leader with heart, then there is harmony. Not only in America, but around the world. Because what happens in America influences the rest of the world, including Korea. But before the current president, there was another one. And you all know what happened. It led to conflict. It led to chaos. It led to disunity. Disunity around the world, not only in America. That's the difference between a person who functions with the crown chakra, with the heart, we say, and a person who only functions mentally. You have questions so far? I think I'm going a little bit too fast and a little bit too complicated. So what is yoga? Let's go back a little bit to the basis. When you speak with Indian people, when they talk about yoga, they don't say yoga, they say yog. Now yog in Korean is of course another word when people say bad things, but Indian people say yog. When you understand what yoga means, then you also understand the purpose of yoga. Because when you translate this to English, it's yog. The pronunciation is almost the same. Yog. Indian people say yog when they talk about yoga. In English, yog. In old Sanskrit, it was called yuj. Yuj. In Dutch, the yog is a juk. European languages are what we call Indo-European. That means they are connected with the old Sanskrit and Indian language. That is why these words are all similar. Now the question is, because you don't know Dutch and you don't know Sanskrit, the question is, what does this mean? Many people don't know because this is an old tool. We don't need this tool anymore these days because we have machines. Humankind since they started developing consciousness, trying to understand themselves and the environment, has done one particular thing that we still try to achieve as modern human beings. And what is that? Is to make life more comfortable, safer, easier, more pleasant. Animals, they just have to do with the environment. If it rains, it rains. They get wet. If it's hot, they're suffering because of the heat. They can't help it. But human beings develop consciousness, and while we first survived by hunting, traveling around all the time, we were hunter-gatherers, as it is called, traveling around, killing an animal to feed ourselves. We developed consciousness and we started to ask ourselves, how can I make life more stable? Because now, sometimes I can catch some food, but tomorrow I'm hungry. I wish I could have food every day. So people started to settle down. They started to live in settlements without traveling around. They stopped traveling around, they settled down, and they started with agriculture. Agriculture is very hard work if you have no machines. You have to plow the field, you have to harvest the crop, you have to bring the harvest home. And we are very small, 60, 70 kilo, which is very small muscle, very small strength, very small power. But while they were sweating and working hard, they saw in the distance, they saw horses, they saw oxen, cows, they saw big animals, 10 times or 20 times as strong as us. And they're just doing nothing, just eating some grass and eating some leaves from the bush and lying down while you are working so hard. So the clever, conscious human being then thought, how nice would it be if that big animal, that big strong animal, could help me with my hard work? And they started to befriend the animals. They caught the animals, they trained the animals, and they used the yoke to utilize the power of the animal. The yoke goes around the neck and the chest of the animal. The farmer puts the leash on the yoke and can tie the plow to the yoke. So the big strong animal pulls the plow through the field, and the farmer only needs to guide the animal. And the same after harvesting, he could exchange the plow for a cart. And he could put 500 kilo of crop on the cart and just guide the animal home to the shed where he could store the crop. Technically, what the yoke does is canalizing energy. The animal that was just doing nothing was not using their energy in an efficient way, at least from our perspective. While we were breaking our back and working so hard to exhaustion, the animal was just doing nothing over there. The yoke is an appliance to canalize energy. That is the meaning of yoga or yog. And this is also the purpose of yoga. I told you a little bit ago that when you open a traditional yoga book, there is no mention of physical anatomy. There is anatomy in yoga, but we call it subtle anatomy. And what is it about? It's about energy. The energy that if you harness it with a yoke, with control, the yoke is a control appliance. That's why yoga means control. It's the science of the control of life. How is that practically helpful for us, for the yoga practitioner? Well, many people complain. The most heard complaint is, I'm so tired. The second most heard complaint is, I feel so gloomy, I'm depressed. Everybody recognizes this. But we are not working manual labor anymore, physical labor anymore. And if you're also not doing extreme sports, then why are we tired? Because being tired means we have wasted a lot of energy. So, of course, we don't like to know this, but we are like that animal doing nothing, wasting time and energy. Of course, if you ask the animal, that animal is perfectly happy, hanging around in the prairie and just eating some grass and leaves. But yoga is a science of life, and it is particularly the science of the control of life. If you understand that, you can do something about your fatigue, but you can also do something about your depression. Because yoga doesn't have physical anatomy, it has subtle anatomy, and it's about energy. And if there is enough energy, your condition is good, physically and mentally. These days, when people complain about depression, the doctor will prescribe an antidepressant, which can make people feel less depressed, but it has many bad side effects that maybe sometimes are worse than the depression itself. What the doctor needs to say to the patient is, I'm not going to give you medicine, you need to take care of your energy household. Because if you have more energy, and that energy is more stable, you will not feel depression anymore. This applies to most depression. There is an exemption, that is when people are suffering from clinical depression. Clinical depression requires medical treatment, but most depression is simply a matter of energy. Now, to understand the importance of canalizing energy through control, just look at how energy works. If you look at atomic power, nuclear power, you know Fukushima, of course, but Korea has nuclear power plants. Most developed countries have nuclear power plants. Why? Because they provide lots of electricity, lots of power, and lots of warmth, heat, to power people's homes and to heat people's homes. And that energy is generated out of atoms, out of matter that we can't even see with the bare eye. That's amazing, isn't it? But if you look at a nuclear power plant, it is huge. And it is so complex, it takes 10 years to build. Why is it so huge and why is it so complex? Because they need to put everything in place to control the process of the power generation using atoms. They need to control it. If they control it, it does miracles. One power plant can maybe provide electricity to 1 million homes. And heat as well. But what if there is no control? The whole thing goes boom, and it causes a huge disaster. That is the importance of control of energy. It's a little bit dramatic, but just to make clear that energy can be very effective if controlled, but can lead to nothing or even disaster, destruction, if it is out of control. Laser beam is the same. A laser beam is in fact light. You can't touch it. And yet, it's so powerful it can cut through steel and concrete. The military is now developing weapons, laser weapons that can shoot airplanes out of the sky. But it's just energy. Energy, when it is not controlled, it's everywhere around us. But it doesn't accomplish anything. But with prisms, using prisms, they focus a huge amount of energy into a very tiny beam, and it becomes a laser beam. And it cuts through steel and concrete. So that's the power of energy. And this is what yoga is about. We are all balls of energy. If that energy is not canalized, it's ineffective. We now, in the modern world, your government, my government, has understood this, and they didn't say everybody should practice yoga. They have gone beyond that. It is the reason why all of us need to go to school. In the Netherlands, if children are not going to school, the government will go to the parents. Parents are responsible for their children to go to school. If the parents refuse, they go to jail for that. You know that? So, which means the government thinks it's so important that children go to school, they will even put the parents in jail if they keep them at home. Why? That's because of this. Because children who grow up without education, who don't learn to canalize their energy and thought, which is what education does to some extent, they become a burden on society. They develop destructive behavior, very selfish behavior. They do not contribute to society. But with yoga, on top of your education, it will help you to preserve valuable energy that otherwise is scattered. And it is, we already came to the conclusion, it's not because of physical labor, hard labor, or manual labor. Why is it that the modern human being like you and me complain about exhaustion and depression, while actually we are not physically very busy? That's because of mental activity. A mental activity that most people are not consciously aware of. subconscious mental activity. And it is also the cause of our suffering. We suffer from doubt, worries, anxiety, but also from emotions, anger, because of ego. When you have more energy, you become healthier, stronger. So yoga is healing. If yoga is done correctly, it's always healing. There is no such thing as healing yoga. Yoga is always healing. In the same way, there is no Kundalini yoga, because when yoga is done correctly, it will always lead to energy rising up. So all yoga leads to Kundalini. Now, you're all Korean, right? What do you say when you meet each other? You say, 안녕하세요. Yeah, what does that mean? Well, actually, literally, it means, are you in peace? And when people go, you say, 안녕히 가세요. Please go in peace. In the Middle East, people say salam. They put their hand on their heart and they say salam. It means peace. This tells us that human beings throughout the ages, they figured out that peace is very important. What is peace? Peace is stability. That you're not disturbed, that you have no fights, conflict, that you have no worries or doubt in your mind, that you're not suffering. Why is this important? Because of energy. When a country is in peace, it starts to flourish. Korea is the most wonderful example of this. 70 years ago, Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world. After the Korean War, the Korean government had only one goal: stability, peace. And even though the neighbors want war, the Korean government found a way to keep peace in this area. And look at Korea now. Only 70 years later, is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. That is what peace does. Look at Ukraine. It's destroyed, it's devastated because of the lack of peace. Look at countries in the African continent. Most countries are struggling. Even though they have gold, they have diamonds, they have oil, most people are poor. Why? Because of lack of peace, stability. You can see this on a global scale, on a national scale, but you see this also with individual people. Just maybe you remember from elementary school that there are children in your class. They are brilliant. They are always on the top of the list. Because in Korea, the teachers make lists, right? Which is not really healthy or good for the children. But anyway, that's what is happening. Children at the top of the list, they are doing very well in terms of their study. Intellectually, they are doing very well. The children at the bottom of the list, we think they are dumb, right? 바보 같아. They are not so smart, not so intelligent. The thing is, when you look at it through the eyes of yoga, the child that is at the bottom could be at the top. The child that is at the top could be at the bottom. What is the difference? The difference is the foundation, the circumstances. Because if you look at the circumstances of the child at the bottom, you see that the child comes from a dysfunctional family where the parents are fighting every day, where the parents are not having a fixed routine for the children because they are just too busy with themselves and their conflicts. Where the child doesn't have a meal 3 times a day. Sometimes they have a meal and sometimes they go to school with an empty stomach. So that child is very unstable and very restless, and because of that they cannot focus. Their mind is not like a laser beam, their mind is scattered. If you give that child routine, foundation, lots of love, and the parents stop fighting with each other, that child will go to the top of the list. If you look closer at the child that is at the top of the list, every semester the highest score on the scorecard, you see that the child comes from a very loving family, very stable, fixed routine. Every morning wake up at 7 o'clock, breakfast, cup of tea, go to school. Every day, very boring, every day. You come home from school, mom has a pot of tea on the table or a soft drink with a cookie, and you have a cookie and you drink your drink, and maybe you go play outside. 6 o'clock there is dinner on the table, 7 o'clock you go to bed. Every day, fixed. So the child has no doubts, no worries, is very focused. So the child's energy becomes like a laser beam, and it translates into intellectual performance. So it's about energy. So every yoga practitioner, if yoga is practiced correctly, becomes more effective in a very natural way. So you will be less exhausted, you will be less depressed. And because you become more conscious, you start to understand why you are dealing with anxiety, with doubts, with worries, etc. So you also naturally reduce your suffering. Maybe you know that Eastern philosophy, Buddhism, Hinduism, Eastern philosophy is based on the idea that life is suffering. Except they look at it from a negative point of view. They say, well, the Holy Book or God says life is suffering. So why should I try? Why should I do my best? Life is suffering anyway, so I just have to accept my suffering. That is a wrong interpretation. To reduce or end the suffering, we need to go to work. Yoga has a positive view on this suffering. It doesn't say, well, life is suffering because the book says so, so I just have to accept my suffering and I will, just suffer. No. Suffering happens for a reason. If you understand that, you can do something about it. But it's not easy. You have to do effort. Peace is a reduction of disturbances. And it reduces the loss of valuable energy so that you start using that energy in a positive way, in a constructive way. For study, for work, for private life. Now, yoga. So yoga is about energy. You do use your body because an unhealthy body leads to poor energy. So yoga has a physical component. that makes you stronger and healthier, so that your energy is stronger and healthier. Now, peace on a national level is the responsibility of the government. That's why there is an army, that's why there is police, that's why there are rules and laws, and people try to stick to those rules and laws. The more we stick to the rules and the laws, the more peaceful society becomes. Society is disturbed when there are certain people that don't stick to the rules and the laws. But yoga is not about society in the beginning, it's about ourselves, our own peace. So, and this brings us to the difference between modern yoga and traditional yoga. That's why we're talking about this. There are 3 conditions that we consider. There are tamas, there is rajas, and there is sattva. Now, sattva is a condition that is rare. Because normal people, naturally, they are either in a tamas condition, when we rest, or they are in a rajas condition, when we are active. Tamas is when you sleep at night, you're in a tamas condition. Rajas is in the daytime. Peace or harmony is sattva. And if you look at the framework of yoga, you realize that everything that yoga proposes, whether it is physical or mental or energy control or studying of the philosophy, it is all for the same purpose, to come to sattva, to be more and more in a sattva condition in our daily life. But, balancing, you know what a tightrope is? Walking on a tightrope? They do that in a circus, right? So there is a rope between 2 spots, and sometimes they have a bar, and they walk on the rope, trying to not lose their balance. It's very hard. You have to focus. Sattva is a condition that can only be achieved by doing effort and by staying focused. Tamas and rajas are natural, day and night. When the sun goes down, the whole of nature becomes tamas. So the birds, they go to the nest to go to sleep. When the flowers are out in the spring, the flowers close in the evening, and you start to yawn and prepare to go to bed. Tamas. Tamas is important because it's the condition in which we recover from activity when we're tired. Rajas starts early in the morning, 4 or 5 o'clock. The birds go out of their nest looking for food, the flowers open up in nature, and you open your eyes and you start to go about your day. Get out of bed, go to the restroom, then you make breakfast, you prepare for work or school. It's all natural. So there is a pattern. There is a pattern. We are in tamas, and when we are enough rested, we become active and we are in rajas. But when we are in rajas, we are active, we become tired at some point. So naturally, we will go into tamas to recover from the activity. So this is what people's pattern looks like mostly. This is the rhythm of nature, and this is how we function. Sattva, ideally, total sattva is here. Complete peace, complete stability, complete harmony. But nobody is in complete harmony. That is ideal, but that is not the cycle of the universe. That's not the cycle of life. You have to move, you have to do things, and you have to rest. What happens with the yoga practitioner is this. You become more and more harmonious. You become more and more harmonious, so you're more and more in the middle, but because of your yoga practice, your new condition, the fluctuation between tamas and rajas becomes smaller. There's more stability, there's more focus, there's more energy. Why is this important? You already heard me say, when you're active, you're in a rajas condition. Now, what is modern yoga? Modern yoga is action. So modern yoga leads to rajas. And when you are rajas, you have to come down to go to tamas. So what does modern yoga do? It perpetuates the fluctuation. Of course it makes you healthier and stronger. But it doesn't lead to a reduction of the fluctuation. It doesn't make you more peaceful, calmer. It's just another exercise, really. Now there are some yoga classes that resemble traditional yoga. We call them yin yoga, healing yoga, hatha yoga. They resemble traditional yoga. But what does the teacher do when you do one of these yogas? They let you do an asana, and then they say, relax. Right? Relax. Is that correct? We know if you're active, when you're in action, there's rajas condition. What happens when you relax is tamas. We have a problem here. It's either tamas or rajas. How do you find sattva? Sattva is literally in the middle. And that is why asana traditional yoga, the physical part of traditional yoga is called asana. It's very special. Because if you do it correctly, it leads to a balance between tamas and rajas, and it leads to sattva. How? By being active without movement. Being active without movement. Do you know what the word asana means? As is still. As means still. Asana means standing still posture. What is special about asana is that you are engaged, physically engaged, without movement. So you're not relaxing in a pose, because it leads to tamas. You're also not moving, because it leads to rajas. We need to find a middle way. Now look, when I do the triangle pose, if I relax in the triangle pose, I end up like this. I'm of course exaggerating, but I'm relaxing. If I engage, I'm not moving, right? Well, my eyes are moving, I'm trying to look at you. I'm breathing, but I'm not moving. My body is standing still, but not relaxing. That is the secret of asana. 3 pose. If I'm not engaged, I'm just standing here, trying to keep my balance. This is relaxing. If I do it correctly, I engage. All the muscles in my body are now engaged, actively engaged, but no movement. Have you experienced this? Have you done this before? I fell in love with yoga because of this. You know why? That is how you recognize sattva. Before I learned about all of this, before I even understood all of this, the first time that I experienced yoga, we were playing basketball. A bunch of guys with a coach. We're playing basketball. So after half an hour of playing basketball, everybody was sweaty and tired. So the coach said, "Hey guys, come here, sit down." So we sat down and he said, 1 leg straight and 1 leg bent and hold your foot. So the first thing we did was we held our foot and we started bouncing. And he said, no. Just hold your foot, stretch up your back, and now stop moving. Just hold it like that and breathe. And so I did. And we held it for like 30 seconds, 40 seconds. And he said, slowly come back. And just relax for a moment. And repeat on the other side. And so we did a couple of these exercises, yoga exercise, asana. I'd never experienced anything like it before. One of the guys said, "Hey coach, what the hell is that?" And the coach said, "That is yoga, my friend." What it did with me, I was just a teenager, restless, all over the place. And sitting down like that and doing asana like that gave such an overwhelming sense of well-being. It felt like my body was being treated with ointment, healing. It felt so good that after taking a shower, I went to the library. Internet didn't exist yet. I went to the library and I went to the why section to find books about yoga. I found a little book called Teach Yourself Yoga from the Reader's Digest series. And that very evening, I started practicing yoga, and I've never stopped since 40 years ago. I fell in love with yoga because it felt so good, and it totally changed my life. I come from a big family, 7 children, 2 of my brothers, and I, as children and teenagers, we always did everything together. But we were on a path of self-destruction. My two brothers, they moved on with their life using drugs and drinking alcohol. I found yoga. My two brothers died when they were in their late 40s, 47. Both of them died 2007 and 2011. What I'm trying to tell here is that I gathered my energy, canalized it like a laser beam, and I changed my life because of that. Away from the self-destruction of my brother's life. I started to study. I started practicing martial arts, Hapkido. It's the reason why I came to Korea. And of course, I found Ajita, my yoga teacher, with whom I studied yoga for more than 10 years. That is what energy does if you start to focus it. And what happened with my brothers is lack of focus, energy being scattered, and it led to destruction. In the same way that a nuclear power plant just explodes when there is no control over the process, human beings also self-destruct. When you do asana, we will do asana when I'm done with the lecture. You can feel for yourself how it does, how it affects you. Sattva, that you recognize, sattva is not a mystery or a fantasy. Sattva is a sense of well-being. Sense of well-being. It feels pleasant. Korean people will say, after doing an asana properly, they will come out of the asana and they will say, 시원해요. That is sattva. But if you understand this, if you recognize this, you also realize that each time when you solved a complicated problem in your life, it happened in a moment that you were not distracted, that you were not anxious, that you were not busy. It happened in a moment, in a sense, when you have a sense of well-being. That you're just staring, you're daydreaming, not thinking about anything in particular. You know, solving a problem always follows a certain pattern. First, you try to solve it mentally. Oh, I have a problem and what am I going to do? And you try very hard to solve the problem. And you notice that the harder you try to solve the problem, the more difficult it seems to become. So what happens? After sleepless nights and headache, at some point you say, impossible, I give up. 포기해요. I give up. You know what happens? The harder you try to solve the problem, the more you block your energy. The moment that you give up, what happens? All your energy starts to circulate. It is in this moment that you're just eating lunch or an ice cream, or you're just sitting on a bench enjoying the sun on the riverside, and poof, the problem that you tried to solve for 3 weeks, sleepless nights, headache, just in a moment of just sitting there, you connect with the essence of the problem, and the problem is not a problem anymore. Problem solved. Just like that. Effortless. That is what yoga has to offer. If you do yoga correctly, it leads to this new condition in which you naturally become a problem solver. It will make life just so much easier. It's all about energy. When you're tensed, when you're engaged, you block energy. The moment that you let go, poof, energy starts to circulate. That is sattva. You know, sometimes children are daydreaming. Most adults, they don't know how to daydream anymore. Why? Because when we were young, teachers and parents, every time we're daydreaming, they say, hey, stop daydreaming, clean your room or do your homework. Because they think daydreaming is bad. You know what? Daydreaming is a condition in which you're contemplating. In the class, in elementary school, in the class, the children that are daydreaming, they soak up everything that the teacher is telling them. And they understand much better than the other kids what it is all about. The daydreaming, we should not punish children for daydreaming. It's actually a very powerful condition. It's a natural yogi. Children are natural yogis. As adults, we need to practice yoga to get that condition back again. Now, let's move on a little. You understand asana now, right? Standing still, no movement, but not relaxing. This is crucial. People who don't understand yoga, they think this is very boring. That is why, to commercialize yoga and make it profitable for the studio owner, they don't do traditional yoga. I stick to traditional yoga because I know the value of it. Because I know how powerful it is to help people take control of their lives, change their destiny. Because that is really what it offers. That's really what it does. When people ask me, why did you come to Korea? I have only one simple answer. I say, 운명. Because it really is. Destiny. You follow your heart, destiny naturally unfolds in amazing ways, miraculous ways. Now, if you have done some yoga classes, teachers very often, they let you do some exercise, and then they walk with their hands behind their back, and they say in a very mysterious way, connect your body with your mind and your soul. You recognize that, huh? Right? Then you think, wow, that sounds nice. I want to connect my body and my mind and my soul too. Have you ever asked the teacher, hey teacher, I want to connect my body and my mind and my soul. Please teach me how to do that. How does it work? Nobody asks. And if you ask, the teacher will get angry because they cannot answer the question. They don't even believe it's possible. I will tell you today that actually it's very simple, very easy to connect the body and the mind and the soul. It's based on the same principle that we talked about before. Energy. According to yoga philosophy, we consist out of three bodies. The physical body, the mental body, and the spiritual body. So, physical body is the simplest, the most primitive, which is enveloped by the mental body, and the mental body is enveloped by the spiritual body. Now, ancient people who did not have compulsory education like we have all enjoyed, they were very physical. All their energy was in their physical body. They didn't have washing machines, they didn't have elevators, they didn't have trains, cars, airplanes. So life was hard, physically hard. All their energy here. But very little energy in the mental body. The modern human being is like this. Study. And in Korea you have a situation where children go to school, then when they come home, they change back and they go to another school. So intellectually very highly developed, but at the cost of the physical body. There are many young kids in Korea, 14, 15 years old, who are physically unhealthy. They complain about pain in their legs and tariapo and on. That's sad, because when you're young, you need to build physical strength as an investment for the future, because when you're a little bit older, you cannot repair that anymore, you cannot correct that anymore. So in America and in Europe, most schools, physical education is an important part of the curriculum. A couple of times a week, you have sports on the schedule. In Korea, it's not so common. Understandable, of course, we want to focus on mental development so we can be successful later in life. But that is very one-dimensional. Because you can be maybe successful while very unhealthy and unhappy. What's the use of that? The most ideal situation is, of course, if the development is balanced. Now, you see that I haven't mentioned the spiritual body yet. Why? Because the spiritual body only manifests when the physical body and the mental body are relatively in balance with each other. So the ancient Greek, they said, healthy mind in a healthy body. In corporis sana. That is this. That is why yoga is not only meditation and study of philosophy, there is also asana, very advanced even, complicated and demanding. That is why monks who live in a monastery, they're not only studying holy books, they also work in the garden. And in Korea, the monks, they have their own form of yoga, danhak or there are actually various kinds of monk Buddhist practices that take care of balance between the physical body and the mental body. It's again about balance. It's again about harmony. The spiritual body only activates when the physical and the mental body are relatively harmonious with one another. Then you get this model. Here you have harmony, relative harmony between the physical and the mental body. Then magic occurs. The spiritual body awakens. Now, why do I call it magic? That is because the best characteristics of human beings are located in the spiritual body. I already explained the meaning of genius. A person in this condition possesses genius. A person in this condition with a highly developed mental body but a neglected physical body, there is no genius. And here, of course, there is no intellect and no spirit present at all. But when we talk about spirituality, many people talk about spirituality as if it is a luxury. Is spirituality a luxury? No. In a world without spirituality, there will be violence. A lot more than we have these days. You can see also in a country like Korea, because of the very fast development in a short time, when things become stable, people naturally become spiritual. How do we know that? Because there is less and less violence in society. Of course it still exists, but compared to 20 years ago or 30 years ago, it reduced considerably. That's the power of stability. Spirituality a luxury? No, it's very important, because the spiritual body contains wisdom. Let's just call it by their name. Compare Biden and Trump. Or Obama. I admire Obama. Why? Because he had a heart. Because he was very intuitive. He was very wise. Look, as a president, there's always something to complain. Those people have a very hard job, because they can never do anything right in people's eyes. But just compare Trump and Biden. Biden, he has a heart. He possesses wisdom. Those are the qualities from the crown chakra. Spirituality is not a luxury. And for spirituality, for spirituality, you don't have to go to a church or to a temple. It can help, but my experience is that there are many people who go to a church or a temple and they enjoy it, but they're not really spiritual. They're not manifesting in the crown chakra. But there are also many people who say, I am not religious at all, but they are very spiritual. That's a natural development. So spirituality, or the spiritual body, is not a luxury at all. The more people function on that higher level of consciousness, the more prosperous society will be. People who are not functioning on that level, they are very selfish. They only care about themselves and their own interests. People who function in the crown chakra, they start to care about the environment, the people around them. Naturally. When I started practicing yoga, it totally changed my life. And one of the things that happened is I started taking care of my family. I started organizing gatherings. I started to make a reservation in September to have a Christmas gathering, having first a performance, and after the performance go to a restaurant. You have to do that in this September, otherwise it's all booked. I started taking care of that, bring the family together, restore harmony that was destroyed. Now I know why. Now I know what happened. At that time, I just followed my heart and I just did. It's a natural development. What I'm trying to say is, the more spiritual people in society, the more happiness, the more harmony, the less violence and disruption. So, again, is it a luxury? No, absolutely not. It's a necessity. And everybody who starts practicing yoga correctly develops in that way from the very first time that you practice yoga. It sounds very complicated and difficult to achieve. No, absolutely not. We call our yoga school Magic Pond Yoga. That is not a joke, because yoga is truly magic. It leads to amazing transformation, change in people. But people don't believe that. But is it complicated? No. All you have to do is stick to yoga properly. traditional yoga. And what that means is what I have explained just before. Because as long as you keep moving, there is no harmony. So no transformation. As long as you keep playing music, your attention is outward. There is no focusing, canalizing of energy. As long as your teacher keeps talking, even during the meditation, modern yoga teachers talk, there is no magic. But people who understand yoga, people who don't understand yoga, they think the traditional yoga is boring because you do it without movement, without music, and a teacher that doesn't talk very much. So yoga is not fit for everybody. So most people will go to a modern yoga class. That is not bad, because I noticed all those years that I've been teaching yoga, there are people who find Magic Pond by first starting with a modern yoga class. And then becoming interested, searching the internet, talking with other people, and they start looking for another teacher that can teach them a little bit more. And then they move on to another teacher that can teach them a little bit more. And eventually they find us. And they learn what yoga really is about. And there's no mystery anymore, there's no dogma anymore. Mystery and dogma only exist because of ignorance. Ignorance means people just don't know, so they're just guessing and speculating and telling lies. But in yoga, everything has a very practical explanation. If only you know. And that is what I do with our yoga, is to bring yoga back to its origin, so that you can bring yourself back to your origin, to your own blueprint. Questions?
So you say the difference between, you're talking about the difference between the traditional one and the modern yoga.
Yeah.
So what's the difference in asana, in terms of asana? Is it going to be very different, or you have like different asanas for the traditional yoga, or is it the same?
No, traditional yoga asana is standing still. Each pose.
Yeah. So I'm talking about more the posture, because you know that I don't know, I cannot really remember the terms of every posture.
You don't have to.
Yeah, but if you go to the just modern classes, and the teacher always tell us something to do with the name of the postures and things. So
Yeah.
those kind of postures would be different from the traditional yoga.
Yeah. The approach is very different. It is in fact the opposite. But like I said before, there are some modern yoga teachers who do teach yoga that looks a little bit like traditional yoga. It's often called healing yoga, yin yoga, hatha yoga. But then they tell you to relax. They do not understand that the goal of yoga is harmony, sattva. Or maybe they know, but then they don't know exactly how to achieve that. So people know a lot about yoga, but all the knowledge that they have is kind of scattered. They do not connect the dots. So that also leads to the situation. I have had many people throughout the years that came to me and said, you know, when I hear your explanations, you answer all my questions. But when I listen to other yoga teachers, I'm often confused. I have more questions afterwards than I had before. And what is refreshing about you is that I feel that you answer my questions. So what I'm saying is that there are many yoga teachers, they have studied, they have a lot of knowledge, but it's all compartmentalized. It's all separate, there is no connection. But what we do here is we connect the dots. It becomes one beautiful picture instead of all kinds of separate compartmentalized ideas. All right, yes?
Did we learn all the 8 limbs? You talked about there are 8 limbs.
Yeah. Yes, of course. Yes, of course. Good question. One of the reasons why many yoga classes are not effective, at least not from our point of view, is because they are not systematic. But yoga is a framework that is very systematic, if you do it correctly. And it's the eightfolded path. And it starts with yama, niyama, asana, of course, is the third one. Pranayama, energy control. Pratyahara, which is detachment. And then the 3 that follow is what together constitutes meditation. That is dharana. Dharana is one-pointed focus or concentration. That is the start of dhyana. Dhyana is actual meditation. Through the practice of dharana, in combination, of course, with what goes before, dharana is mind control. When you become skillful at mind control, a condition occurs that we call dhyana. That is actual meditation. That is when the mind is very calm and focused. If you are able to sustain dhyana, then samadhi occurs. In samadhi, you are in pure contemplation. You're not so much aware anymore of your physical body, of your worries and your doubts and your concerns in daily life. You're just connected with the universe. You're contemplating. Any kind of problem that you insert in the condition of samadhi, you will solve, just like that. Yama is yama and niyama, both. That is the moral foundation of yoga. Non-violence, non-lying, non-stealing, non-desire, and chastity. The niyama is purity, austerity, contentment, and 2 more. Why do we need a moral foundation? Is that because we want to be superior to other people? That's sometimes what people think. Do you think you are better than other people because of yama and niyama? No. This has a very practical purpose. Yama and niyama reduce our internal conflict. For example, I will keep it short. In the course, I will explain it very extensively so that you can apply it in your daily life. But why do you need non-violence? We have not only violent acts, but also violent verbal violence and even violent thoughts. When you are violent, you attract violence. If I punch you, you punch me back. If I shout at you, you will fight with me, shout at me back. But what many people don't understand is when they have a violent thought, people also will react to you. Even though you didn't say or do anything, people feel your violence, your aggression. So if we want to be more harmonious in life, more sattvic, we need first to take care of all these internal disruptions. It sounds logical, but we are suffering from these disruptions because we are functioning subconsciously. We are just not aware that we are behaving like that. It's human. It's just human behavior. But if you study those concepts a little bit, you develop a deep insight in yourself. And next time when you're communicating with people, you realize that what you are doing is causing a conflict. And that is when you say, hey, I can choose. I can have a conversation without leading to conflict. How nice life will be if I can control that. So that is why you learn yama and niyama before asana. Of course, in the course, things are integrated. We learn yama niyama, at the same time we start asana in the first class, and we also start on a low level preparing for meditation and energy control. Pranayama is energy control. Many people think it's breathing. There are also teachers that say you can do it as a breathing exercise, but you can also do it as an energy control exercise. Well, we do not concern ourselves with breathing. You can do that anywhere else. If pranayama is done as actual energy control, using the power of the mind, it leads to amazing results. Pratyahara is detachment. Pratyahara is the most ignored subject in yoga courses. If it is part of a course, of a curriculum, then the teacher will say, Pratyahara means detachment. So detach from your material possessions. Because material possessions make you greedy. Detach from your status, from your ego. And often the subject doesn't go much further than that. But pratyahara is the tool of the yogi. It is so important that we spend 2 lectures, 2 classes to discuss the subject so that you know it in very deep detail and can apply it in daily life situations. That is how you deal with distractions, that is how you deal with emotions, that is how you deal with any kind of undesirable aspect of life can be dealt with based on pratyahara. But that means you first need to develop insight in how that works. It's something that you need to implement consciously. It's a process. It starts with the awareness. Hey, I am being disturbed. Hey, I am experiencing certain feelings that are negative or not desirable. Normally people undergo these kind of conditions and they will simply react upon them. They will just act and react upon them. That is what the subconscious functioning does to us. When subconscious becomes conscious, you are aware of how you are thinking, how you are feeling. That is the key to taking control. And I make it sound easy, but it means that you have to start paying attention. And that is something that you learn and develop as a result of the crown chakra functioning, awakening of consciousness. Over time, you develop more and more awareness of how you function internally. This is also the reason why we should not play music in the class, because it distracts people from this process. It's the reason why the teacher should not continuously talk about muscles and joints and organs, because it distracts from this process. You cannot become conscious of your subconscious if you cannot turn your mind inwards. So this is everything that I've told you about yoga, the valuable parts of yoga. That is the reason why I've never considered teaching modern yoga. Because I know this is too wonderful and too valuable not to share with people. So I stick to this. I'm an old school yogi, and I do not want to diminish if people are not interested in what yoga has to offer in its traditional form. There are many other places where people can go. And I just want to be there for those people who need this, who want this. There's so much more. I'm thinking about explaining the chakras, the 7 chakras, but my voice is getting hoarse, and I think you need a little break also. It's been 2 hours already that I've been talking. Let's have a short break, just a toilet break. And then we will do some asana, 20-25 minutes in a traditional way. And then we will finish with just a 5-minute simple meditation exercise. Yeah? Okay, thank you for your attention. Let's have a short break and start again in 5 minutes.